Welcome, G developers, to a brand new set of tutorials that I'm referring to as functional storyboarding. Storyboarding has to do with your layout of your storyline or plot lines. I'm calling this functional storyboarding because I want to deal with the mechanisms by which you deliver those storylines, right? How we can make them functional in some way. So we're going to be going over a few things to sort of set the mood, set the atmosphere, and deliver the kind of storyline that you want for a game like this. Alright, so where do we begin? Well, let's begin actually with the preview here for a second. And at the end of the last set of tutorials, we sort of talked about this problem of it's a little clunky going in and out of our rooms. And as a matter of fact, if you look in this section here, you can see the ghosting effect of the items being created from our external layout. See it? Alright, so one way that games sort of give the screen enough time to render the objects is by utilizing a kind of fading effect, right? Fading in and fading out of rooms. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to build that today. And in order to do that, let's actually start by, I'll go here. Let's go to our global variables. And I want to create a brand new global structure here. And I'm going to call this one the G manager, and that's our game manager, basically. And I want to add 3 child variables to this. First one I want to add, we're going to call start of game. And that's just going to indicate, did we just begin a brand new game or not? Next one I want to add is check for fade. And the last one is stop Bob. Okay, and we'll utilize these 3 throughout in order to get the fading effect that we need and to create the proper atmosphere for this. So let's hit apply, and now let's add our new sprite here, which I'm going to call fade screen. And all the fade screen is basically I went into Paint 3D, created an 800 by 600, which is the exact measurement of our gaming screen, created a black sprite that is just 800 by 600. And I'm going to make this global because we're going to use this throughout to go in and out of rooms and stuff like that. And I want to create an external event to run this code that we can call upon as well. So let's create an external event. Let's rename it Fade the Screen. Okay, let's associate it with the Basic Kingdom room, add an empty event, and now let's go to our Basic Kingdom room external events, and let's add, I can right click on this actually, and just add a new group. Here it is at the bottom. I'm going to collapse these just so that it's easier to see on the screen. Let's place our new group at the top, and we'll call this one Game Mechanics. And we'll right click here, and we'll add a link, move it over, and let's add fade the screen. Okay, the last bit of prep work that I want to do is we have our D key is released here that we use for testing. I'm going to just clear that out so that we can sort of use this for a minute. Alright, so We're going to use this black screen at the beginning of every scene, just about, right? When you're walking into a room, at least for the basic kingdom room especially. So it makes sense then to go ahead and create that sprite here. So let's go to Common Actions for all objects, Objects, create an object, and we want to create the fade screen. And since it takes up the entire visible portion of our screen, we just can put it in the 0, 0 position and it'll just take up the whole screen. Next thing we want to do is we want to set the Z order to give it a top priority. We don't want anything above this, so we'll do fade screen equals 500. And that, if we do a preview here, that should give us just a black screen. Yep, there it is. So now the question is this. What do we want to do? How do we fade this out? Well, let's think about our previous tutorial, right? This set of tutorials. Let me grab an item here for a second. Do you remember anything that we did in our previous set of tutorials that was basically creating like a fading effect? Well, you might recall that when we wanted to indicate to the user that he or she was hovering over an item, we changed the opacity of that item. And we talked about how when you have the opacity set to 255, which is its maximum, it's fully visible. When you set the opacity to less than that, or even 0, 0 makes it completely transparent. So we can utilize this for our fading effect. Let me show you. So in the DQs released event here, let's go ahead and let's go to Sprite, Visibility, change the sprite opacity of fade screen, and let's just subtract 25. So now every time we tap the D key, it's going to take 25 from the opacity of fade screen. Let's go ahead and run our preview. Alright, it's got a full opacity here at 255. So I'm going to hit the D key, hit it again, and there it goes, a fading effect. Alright, so we know the mechanics behind what we want to do. Now we just need to implement it through the software to do it by itself. And in order to do that, we're going to introduce timers here. And I'll just say this about timers. I would say timers in GDevelop are maybe difficult in the beginning and then easy in the end, because I think they almost made it too easy that it's almost confusing in terms of the language. I'll show you what I mean here. So, where to begin? Alright, let's begin by setting up our fade the screen external event here in the way that we always do. Let's set our variable to begin it here, and that's going to be check for fade, right? gmanager check for fade equals 1. Now, normally we'll bookend this, right? But we're actually not going to do that for right now, because we have to code this external event a little bit differently than the other ones. Let's go back to basic kingdom room. All right. So I want to actually, at the beginning of the scene, I want to initialize and create a timer. And a way to do that is you go to timers, and this is what I mean by it sounds a little confusing, but it's really not. Start or reset a scene timer makes it sound like you already have one available. You don't, right? But this actually creates the timer if it's not there. So we're going to go to start or reset a scene timer, and we're going to call this timer fade my screen. All right. So we initialize this timer. Let's go back to fade the screen external event, and let's actually start coding that timer by going to timers and setting the value of the scene timer. Now, time in seconds refers to how many seconds you want to pass before you execute that code again. So you could put every 10 seconds execute this bit of code, or 1 second, or half. You could even put half a second here, 0.5. We're going to put 1 second for right now. And you have to give the timer's name in quotes, and it's fade my screen. And let's just get this up and running for a second, and then we'll come back to finishing up all the rest of the code. So we essentially want to change that opacity, right? By going to Sprite, Visibility, Fade, Screen. We want to subtract, let's subtract 1. And let's see how that looks here. So now I'm going to hit the preview button. We still have more coding to do because we need a way out of this. See, it doesn't like it. And I think that's because you have to, I believe you have to, oh, we never set, it didn't run because we never set check for fade equal to 1. Okay, let's do that. Whoops. There we go. All right, let's try that and see if you can just do that bare minimum bit of code here. Look at that. All right. Well, let's keep going though, because we've got to clean this code up. So here's what we want to do now. We need to think about our way in and way out here, okay? Because again, we don't need this running all the time. So here's what we can do. We can add a condition, right? Let's add two sub conditions here. And let's move this down to here. And let's add the condition as long as the opacity of fade screen is greater than 0, right? 0 is again fully transparent, you can't see it at all. It even tells you up here. As long as it's greater than 0, go ahead and minus 1 to the opacity of fade screen. However, right, let's add the other condition here. If the opacity of fade screen is, I'm going to use less than or equal to, just because sometimes you'll change intervals, and I don't know if GDevelop cuts off a negative number here and just defaults to 0, but less than or equal works here. If you're less than or equal to 0, what do we want to do? Well, we want to actually clean up memory a little bit here. So we're going to common actions for all objects. Let's go ahead and delete our fade screen, right? We don't need it anymore. So let's delete that. We can also delete our timer. Fade my screen. We don't need that anymore either, right? And then here is where we want to get our out for check for fade, right here. So let's go ahead and change our variable check for fade. Let's set it equal to 0 again. Now, it may not look like we did much with that, but now once this is done fading, we will have basically cleaned up our code back to where it was. And now when you leave and go back in, you'll fade in. Although I think this is probably a little bit too slow for just a fading into a screen. We might want to double this to 2. And let's see how much more quickly that works. I think for simply fading into a room, it's probably still too slow. I think that's good. Now see if you can watch the chest here and see if you can see any more ghosting. Nope, we got rid of that ghosting. All right, we'll continue to modify this in our next tutorial so that we can separate out when we're actually beginning a game and when we're just fading into and out of a room.